Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our testifiers. We're now going to move into a question period. And because it's just me asking questions, I want to just, I'm going to open up with some questions to our tribal leaders. And but I want to just sort of welcome some give and take. And if the tribal leaders have specific questions that you'd like to ask of our federal witnesses, I'd be really happy to facilitate this. Obviously, this is a huge topic, and it's not possible for us to get all of our questions answered. But my goal from this is that we can get some next steps I can then take back to the committee for the work that we can do together. So let me just start out with a question to any or all of the leaders here. As you think about I love this. I can't remember who said this, but the idea of the great catch-up when it comes to infrastructure. Roads, bridges, broadband, water, and sewer. Yeah, welcome back, Chair Dupuy. Chair Duchamp, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you certainly would be more than welcome to come and join as well. I would just like to hear a little bit from our tribal leaders, the tribal leaders that are here. What do you see as the most important impacts of this infrastructure spending? And this gets to what is embedded in all of your testimony. And what is like the one or two most important things we can do to this, that this $13+ billion in formula dollars, as well as grant dollars, what is the most important thing we can do to make sure that you have good and equitable access to those resources? So what do you think will be the greatest advantage, and what do you think is the most important thing we can do to ensure equitable access to these resources? Would anybody like to start?
I will.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Chief Executive Benjamin, and then Chair Dupuy.
I think we've heard a lot of the tribal leaders talk about the allocation of funding and direct funding to the tribes. I think is something that's going to be very beneficial. And I think when I think about the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, we are a smaller tribe, but we've been fortunate that we have a grants department that can assist in securing some funding, even though they're overloaded as well. But direct funding, I think, is so important to tribes. So the smaller tribes or other tribes that don't have the capacity are not left out of the opportunity to have funding to make a better life for their community members.
Thank you. Chair Dupuy.
I think the impact isn't here yet, but to Melanie's comments, I completely agree with that. It's one of the biggest things that tribal leaders have been saying for years, ever since I've been part of this since 2002, is direct funding. Allow us, if we get the direct funding, it allows us to build what we need. It allows us to look at the need, but most importantly, the unmet need. And by traveling to the reservations, some of you get to see the good thinking, the good ways that tribes are implementing stuff. For example, microgrid. Fond du Lac has electrical corridor microgrid. And my brother over here brought up the infrastructure piece of broadband. We also have our own broadband company started before COVID. And we need to be able to access that out farther than what it is off the reservation boundaries. But it's imperative that the direct funding comes to the tribes. That allows us to do what is needed for our constituents, but most importantly, so we can secure a future for the unborn. That's the ultimate goal with tribal leaders. So, Igwich.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of the dollars that we get through IHS for projects, they require a tribal match. Some of the smaller tribes, we're in no position to make that match. We have a sewer project that's in the works. It's on our SDS list. It got the line there that, you know, where's your part coming from? We don't have that. So it comes with a lack of funding for us up north and a lack of a grant department too. So.
Thank you. And for the record, Chair Duchamp, could you just identify yourself?
Robert Disha, the Grand Portage Tribal Chair.
Thank you very much. Would other tribal leaders like to comment on this, answer this question? Chair Larson?
I think the biggest piece is just respecting the tribes as sovereigns.
Mm-hmm.
Like they said, we know what the needs are. the restrictions on some of the funding pieces are what hurt. Not having access to the match, not having departments that, I mean, we have an environment office of one staff. So when we're talking climate issues, we have one staff. We have a grant writer and a new grant writer that is learning. So those things aren't always as easy as you think, just write a grant and you can get it. So we just want to put those out there.
Thank you. Chair Chavers, did you want to say something?
Yes, I would like to say for some of the programs that you listed, the direct funding allocation would be great for tribes, but it's when the funding comes or when it's announced, sometimes it's like a square trying to be fit into a round hole for us because it doesn't meet any of those categories or those funding opportunities. Our uniques are need. So don't make such specific funding categories where it can't meet our need. That's why I think the direct funding is better. If you can do the direct funding, then basically the tribes have the ability to say, well, we can address that need with that funding, but if we went your route, we wouldn't even be able to access the funds. All the programs you mentioned, sir, Mr. Bowen, no disrespect, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. I'll be honest. And I'm a small rural tribe in need of Department of Energy money. We don't have renewable energy. We don't have any type of energy needs that are being met because we don't know about them. We're small. You have to realize we're the tribes that are small. One environmental staff. Yep, we have one. That's the comments I have.
Chair Chavers, how many people do you have? Just help us understand that a little bit better, because I think this is a really big deal. And when you're getting information, others can respond to this as well. Secretary Savariego, I'd love to hear from you as well. But when you are receiving information about funding opportunities, especially grant opportunities, which is the biggest challenge, it seems to me, like, how do you get that information? How do you all get that information? And what would be better ways of getting access to what is available out there?
Usually a tribal leader and or a director of a program will get the funding opportunity, the funding announcement letter, and then we route it to the appropriate individuals. We have one grant writer and we have to prioritize what our grants are going to be used for. Right now, we've got issue with elderly housing.
Right.
So, and then the other part about it is having the ability to provide the backup documentation for that grant, the data.
You mentioned this in your testimony.
We don't have the data. We don't have the capabilities of collecting that data. And so we hear about shovel-ready projects. We're scrambling to get shovel-ready projects because we've don't have the resources. So a lack of resources, I think, in staff and collection data, broadband, internet. We're doing our own fiber to home. We're finally going to have high-speed internet. Internet is huge in rural areas in all tribal communities because with the pandemic, it came to the forefront. So that's what the resources and it's just, we have a lot of inadequacies that you think of the larger tribes, and I'm thinking like Southwest and whatever, but in our area, we're all struggling with staff.
I just want to reiterate her point because.
If I could just, I'm sorry, I know that the folks who are trying to keep a record of this committee hearing are going to, so if you could just identify yourself when you speak so that the folks that are keeping a record will be able to know who's speaking. Thank you very much.
Tribal Secretary for Upper Sioux Community, Adam Savariego. Is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
Oh,
Good.
I guess for the past year for the Upper Sioux Community, just the lack of professional talent, particularly in rural areas, has been difficult. Particularly for our tribal planner, who is our lead grant writer. It took us 8-9 months to finally just get a resume submitted for application. And then obviously someone, if they're not privy to tribal nations, sovereignty, and the politics of it all, that's another year-long process for them to learn the needs of our tribal community. So direct funding access, as we keep mentioning, has helped a lot. I think of the ARPA funds, the ability to use those funds immediately for a variety of different programs post-COVID or the post-pandemic phase was really beneficial to our tribe. But as Deuce said, tribes know themselves best, and so believe us when we say that ultimately, particularly because of the lack of staff. If we're not a metro area tribe by any means, it's just been a battle, like I said, for the past year now in this position, looking for someone with the capability and competence to attract them to a town of 2,800 people in Southwest Minnesota.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on this question?
As far as getting the information,
As yeah, the question, yeah, as far as getting the information, let me go to Chair Anderson, because I don't think you've had a chance to speak on this question yet. I'm asking generally sort of two related questions. One, what do you see as the benefit of these infrastructure dollars, and what specifically do we need to do to make sure that that benefit can be equitably distributed? And we've had some really good comments about direct funding, flexibility. Chair Anderson, please.
Hi, Chairman Anderson, the Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux Community. I wanted to mention and reiterate all my addressing of your questions were answered. But and the biggest piece of the lack of workforce, especially in the rural areas, is and expertise is going to have to be addressed in this funding. I think you might have some allowance for that assistance. And then if you have a lack of workforce to get these projects shovel ready, you'll just keep dragging it on. So I think that direct funding, and there might even be a question about the equitable distribution of it as well. I mean, you have more needs in certain areas, and I think, Bryan, you certainly addressed all of these things the BIA is responsible for. And I like the tiered effect of the sanitary funding that the IHS is looking at. There's a piece for the planning process. We all know that it takes a certain percentage of the dollars it takes to do a project. So if you've got $1 million project, you might spend $100,000 on planning for it or engineering it. So all of these things, along with everything everyone was saying about access, open communication, impacts the timing of all of these projects, especially for the rural tribes, because they need that time to make sure they're doing the right thing, and the planning process is so key to that. So,
Thank you. Chair Larson.
I think the piece that would go along with it is that technical assistance would be nice. We have gotten a lot of the information from your office. Raven has been great, I will have to say. And I think to be able to get that technical assistance for our staff to help navigate through it would be a great help.
Thank you very much. Chair Dupuy.
I'd just like to add on the technical assistance. If we take a look at it, and you can vouch for this too, is that for a very long time, we never had that. So a lot of different things were put into place, started with the initiation of Indian gaming, for example. I can speak for Fond du Lac. We didn't call outsiders in to build a casino. We didn't call outsiders in to do this. We did it on our own. But it only carries so far. And the principals that come in as a tribal leader, all grant principals will come to me as an email. Then my job is to disperse that out to whoever we have. But there is a lack of technical assistance or technical knowledge within inside of that structure. That infrastructure bill will allow tribes to set that up also within our community colleges and principles like this for this training and technical assistance that we need. But again, it all goes back to one simple thing, in my opinion, is that direct funding. If anybody in the country knows how to stretch the dollar, the tribes have proved that. The tribes have proved it over and over that we're the group of people who are forced to stretch the dollar, to try to make things work, and to look out for, again, the most important thing is what we do today as tribal leaders is to protect the future for our unborn and ensure that there's a future for our unborn. So there's things that we need, but it kind of relies to that simple principle of giving us the direct funding allows us to build the infrastructure what we need to reach our unmet needs. It's nobody else's responsibility because nobody else can do it. For 530 years, somebody's trying to tell us what's best for us and it's failed. And if we get that direct funding, that allows our tribes to build up that infrastructure that we need to secure that future again for our unborn. Miigwech.
Thank you. I want to ask if Mr. Roy would like to say a few words. I see you've joined the table. Please, you could just please identify yourself for
Thank
the.
you, Senator Smith. My name is Secretary Treasurer Alan Roy of the White Earth Nation. And I just really appreciate the comments that are being offered by our federal counterparts. It's very encouraging to hear Mr. Bauman with his remarks related to energy. I know in my last leg of my service in tribal government, we focused on a number of areas there. And it's just very encouraging to see that there's plenty of opportunity out there. I would just say communication is a huge thing. I think Ms. Chavers has emphasized that. We just don't know about a lot of these programs. And I think just by having a field hearing and bringing the folks out here to meet us makes a huge difference. And so that leader-to-leader discussion, it can't be replaced by email or Dear Tribal Leader letters. I get tons of those every week, but just seeing somebody face to face makes a huge difference. So thank you.
Rich. I'm going to turn to our federal witnesses here. I'm quite confident that the emphasis that you're hearing from tribal leaders today around direct funding and flexibility, challenges around tribal match, and technical assistance are all things that you're quite familiar with. Maybe Mr. Newland, would you like to respond and just tell us a little bit about how the federal government, where you are, and especially in Interior, is working to respond to these needs from tribes?
Sure. At the Department of the Interior, we have much clearer legal authority to do the direct funding that we've heard about today through Public Law 638 contracting, as well as self-governance annual funding agreements. And many of our fellow agencies don't have that explicit power. And so the relationship, rather than being a government to government relationship, is often, when we talk about square peg and round hole, becomes a grantor-grantee relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've heard about this and also have heard about, Chair Chavers, the frustrations about not knowing all of the other components of funding available to tribes. We're trying to do that, get at that in a number of ways, including through the White House Council on Native American Affairs and making sure that our folks in BIA, who often in the field have the most regular communication with tribal leaders and staff, are conduits for that information. And I'm also aware that when it comes to these notifications for consultation or funding availability, they come either not at all or all at once. And so as tribal leader, you go to your mailbox in the tribal office and there's a stack this thick of tribal leader letters from different agencies, and consultations are overlapping and deadlines are overlapping. And so your staff of one or your staff of one half are forced to come to you as tribal leader, your tribal administrator, and try to triage all of that. And it's very challenging. So we're working at the Department of the Interior with our colleagues across the government to help folks understand self-determination and flexibility. In Executive Order 13175 from President Clinton, it talks about consultation, but it also directs federal agencies to work with tribes on waivers for these program requirements for grants, so that when there are technical requirements that tribes can't turn on a dime and meet quickly, that agencies have a directive from the president to waive those requirements in partnership with tribes. And so we're trying to educate our colleagues in other agencies on their authority, and not only their authority, but their directive from the president to use those powers and to work with tribes on consensual policy making. and then to coordinate our consultation notices and notices of availability, and to really turn our relationship across the federal government away from a grantor-grantee relationship into a government-to-government partnership. And we've seen that with the rescue plan funding, as the secretary noted, when it comes with the ability to use as needed to respond to crises and urgent needs without a lot of with a lot of flexibility and without a lot of really detailed restrictions. We've seen tribes do just amazing work with that to benefit their own communities as well as neighboring communities.
I remember quite well, leaders, the many conversations we had between the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, which I think was an example of a significant improvement in terms of providing direct funding. And I've been able to visit some of the tribal nations around the state to see the benefits of that in terms of what you have already, how you've already deployed those resources so effectively. But I want to follow up, Mr. Newland, on something that you said. It's really, I think, important that rather than a government-to-government relationship, which is what should be, we have a grantee-grantor relationship, which is a completely different thing. And you mentioned, I think, that there are challenges because not every agency has the authorities they need in order to fulfill that government-to-government treaty and trust and legal responsibility. Did I understand that correctly? So because that's a congressional issue.
Correct. The 638 contracting authority is really limited, to the Department of the Interior and to Indian Health Service. And then there are examples in other agencies for limited purposes. And so even where we have agencies that have an agency officials that have a desire to provide a lot of the flexibility with funding that we're talking about, they don't have the broad scope of authority to do that we have within Indian Affairs. And so the executive order that President Clinton issued, that President Biden has reaffirmed, tries to make up for that by directing agencies to waive some of these restrictions. But that's a muscle that hasn't been exercised consistently in the last 2 decades. So, it's a workaround for some of these challenges, but it doesn't shave the square peg into a round peg.
Thank you. I think that's very important, and I think suggests place for further work on the part of Congress. I think a lot of times federal agencies are trying to figure out how to implement something that when Congress also has a job to do that it hasn't done. And I'm also just struck by the fact that, I can't even count the number of federal employees that must work in all of the agencies that are interacting one way or another with tribal governments, and the level of understanding of what that government-to-government relationship should be is dramatically different. I know the state of Minnesota has worked very hard to do significant training around what that government-to-government relationship looks like, and I think that and I know there's work that's being done in the Biden administration to try to improve that, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of individuals that one way or another are doing this work, and it's one of the reasons why on the side of the tribes that it often doesn't feel like there's a kind of coordination and cooperation. I think Chair Dupe wanted to say something, and then I just want to give a chance to, we are going to wrap up in a few minutes. Want to give a chance to Ms. Fowler, Mr. Bauman, if you have something else you wanted to add to this conversation.
I was on a call not too long ago about tribal ecological knowledge. And the conversation that we're talking about right now was brought up within that. When you have that many agencies that want to work with tribes, it becomes a logistical nightmare. And one of the things that we're saying is they want to have consultation with all the tribes. Well, there's 576 tribes. How is that going to happen? So the conversation went into a regional, but it also went into the training, what's going on within the state of Minnesota and how you can apply that at a federal level. Because within the consultation policy at the federal level, it works both ways. And so the question I'm going to ask you, Natawis, is the executive order, if I remember reading it, I can't remember if it says shall and will or may. And so I think the executive order where it's put into place is how the interpretation comes through. The tribes, when they request that under the interpretation or request that waiver principle designated in an executive order, an agency will turn around and says, no, we're not going to do that. So by an executive order put into place, it becomes law. So don't want to make it any harder than it is, but agencies are violating the law. And that's one of the issues that we ran into the state of Minnesota is the execution of statutes that if they don't follow the statutes, it's violating law or breaking the law in its simplicity. So them are things, key things I think that has to be done on that interpretation principle from the federal government to the tribes in that manner and its agencies. But to have consultation with 576 tribes on ecological knowledge is going to be an absolute legit. Break it up into regions. And I think that's where this should be going. And by doing that, we
Mr. Bauman, would you like to, is there anything that you'd like to add to this conversation as we've been discussing around kind of solidifying the government to government relationship within this process as we work hard to get these infrastructure dollars out the door?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. I just wanted to say a few words about some of the issues that were raised this morning. First of all, we are aware that the $3.5 billion that was appropriated to the Indian Health Service under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was really aligned with the inventory in our sanitation deficiency system. So at the end of December of 2021, we had $3.4 billion worth of projects in our SDS. But that's, I think what's important for folks to understand is that's not a static list. It gets updated annually. There may be changes to state or federal regulations that require additional projects to be added. Maybe that we haven't identified all of the deficiencies that are out there, so those need to be added. And then we need to remove those that have been funded. So there will still be a need for sanitation facilities construction funding, but we are really excited about the opportunity for such an infusion of funds. There are some restrictions we have to work with as statutory for the most part. For example, I believe the matching that was mentioned, I think that refers to the ineligible costs of our projects. So we are able to fund our water and sewer system projects that benefit Indian homes. And so there are portions we're not able to spend our appropriations on non-Indian homes or commercial businesses. But we have a responsibility to work with the tribe to identify alternate resources to fund those costs that are ineligible for our appropriations. So for example, the $581 million that will go towards 475 projects in fiscal year 2022, tier 1 projects, we know there's $118 million of ineligible costs that go along with those projects, but we're going to be working hard to identify alternate resources.
Thank you.
We also know that the administrative and administration costs are an issue. That's why we requested the additional $49 million in the president's budget for fiscal year 2023. But we're going to be also working as hard as we can on the federal side. We're
in the entire state, but it carries through per capita to the entire country. So Region 5 under IHS really needs to be looked at under that principle of adding more funding to Region 5 to reach them unmet needs. One of the questions you said is under a comment you made under the DOE is under the department that there is not a direct line or direct funding principle. We understand that, but there can be tribal set-aside, so we don't have to compete with others under that manner. And I think the tribal set-aside is very important to put into place, that tribes have that equality principle to do that. They don't have to go through a competitive process against a larger corporation or organization. Simple tribal set-aside revenue put into place can help the tribes in that manner. Miigwech, so.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and for providing your testimony and providing this conversation. I think that the opportunity with the Infrastructure and Jobs Act is significant. it is equally significant that we ensure that that opportunity works for Minnesota tribal nations and for tribal nations all over the country. And we've heard today from these leaders about the importance of direct funding and respect for flexibility in the way that the dollars are dispersed. We've also heard about the special challenges that small tribes and rural tribes in particular have, not only with providing matches and for finding the people to fill the jobs that you have, but realizing that you might not even have the jobs that you can fill in order to participate as fully as you might like to in the grant making process. I think it's really a good thing that we have Mr. Newland, who has experience both as a tribal leader and now working within the federal government system, who I think understands, as do I think all of our witnesses on the federal side, about what these challenges are like on the ground for tribal leaders that are trying to do the very, very best that they can to take good care of their members and their responsibilities. We also heard about the importance of the deep need for technical assistance and the challenges around trying to figure out how to put together the data that you need to put together in order to participate in these strategies. And again, sort of the historic underfunding that makes it difficult to take advantage of this now historic funding that is here to improve the lives of people living on tribal lands. And we have not today talked very much about urban indigenous communities, but this is also an extremely important thing that I keep in mind all the time as well as I think about these responsibilities. I want to thank very much Chair Anderson and the Shakopee Mdewakanton community for hosting us today and your generosity and having us all be here. I also want to let all of our witnesses know that you may receive follow-up questions, written questions for the record from me or from other members of the committee that aren't here. We'll let you know if we have any of those. This hearing record will be open for 2 weeks. I want to thank all of the witnesses for your time and your testimony today, and this hearing is adjourned.
Nice job, Liz.
Five of us are the only ones that.